thanks for joining me once again in this, the next in my series of short videos that I'm posting online in support of my latest book, which is my first novel entitled Sailing Towards the End of the World. If you like the content, please give it a thumbs up. If you've got any queries, observations, just stick them in the comments section below. Today I'm going to talk about some of the recurring themes which impact upon key characters in the book, and this has been, I suppose, in some way my vehicle for introducing themes I've dealt with on a personal level, on a professional level, in my private therapeutic practice and in my interactions with learners in the learning environment as an adult teacher. First of all, I'm going to talk about self-harming. Jonathan the Tiger Palmer, when you read the book, it becomes apparent he does self-harm. He self-harms in so much as he cuts himself physically, that's how it manifests. He also self-harms psychologically, where his own inner voice is highly critical of him, very discerning. He beats himself up psychologically, so to speak, judged on the metric he has set for himself. There's such a high standard he's set for himself. This is one of the things I've come across almost on every occasion when dealing with private clients in my therapeutic practice. People have a very, very critical inner voice. Their relationship with themselves can be abusive in so much as they really, really pour hurt upon themselves. Why do people do this? People do this because it's in relation to a popular saying, a popular old saying, and old popular sayings are old and popular for a good reason. Familiarity breeds contempt. You can never separate from the person you can never get away from, and that is yourself. You know yourself intimately more than anyone else externally ever could. From the point of inception of your life to the point where you decease, you have a close relationship with yourself. So therefore, you know your flaws, your foibles, your failings. You know them more intimately than anyone else ever could. Therefore, we tend to beat ourselves up because we cannot separate from the person we are always with, ourselves. Jonathan Palmer exemplifies this in the book. He cuts himself. Why does he cut himself? That could be quite a complex question. People can cut themselves and physically self-harm for all manner of reasons, which are obviously linked to their psyche, their psychology, because the way that we think impacts upon the way that we behave. Everything begins with a thought. Jonathan the Tiger Palmer cuts himself because he feels so numb after the trauma he has been through, the personal trauma of losing his wife who is pregnant and his child and his best friend who dies of the plague. He cuts himself because he is ashamed of himself. He feels numb, so he cuts himself in an attempt to let the hurt out. He cuts himself to see himself bleed because he feels so numb, to remind himself that he is alive. The act of cutting himself and seeing blood coming from his own body reaffirms to him, I am still alive. I still function. I feel something. He also cuts himself to take control. Albeit it's an abusive relationship he has with himself, but in a chaotic world, the world has never been anything but chaotic, no matter what age you live in. The 17th century, where the story is set, is a particularly tumultuous time, politically, economically, in every sense. Black Plague is rampant through Europe and indeed much of the known world. We're talking about swathes of the population to the extent 50 and 60% of the population are falling foul and dying a painful, horrendous death to the Black Plague. So it's not really odd or strange or surprising that people of this era would feel out of control. Jonathan Palmer's life has tailspun into chaos. A key reason why he cuts himself is that it gives him an element of control. It's one part of his life he can control, the act of cutting himself to remind himself, I can feel, I can function. And he's trying to let the grief, the sadness, the trauma out, physically trying to let it out. It's like getting a bottle of fizzy juice or pop and shaking it hard and then just letting the cap off and seeing the explosion. That is primarily why Jonathan the Tiger Palmer self-harms. I'm going to talk about suicide briefly as well, because Jonathan Palmer is suicidal. I have had experience of suicide on more than one occasion. In my personal life and in my professional life, I have dealt with suicide. I've seen the impact, the far-reaching impact it can have upon the person who has committed suicide's family and their circle of friends and their society. Suicide is the most extreme form of self-harming. People will consider suicide when they feel they cannot go on. The pain of life has become too much. They can't carry on. They need to stop the pain. And in the most extreme cases, that is when people will commit suicide, generally speaking. Interestingly enough, over 75% of all suicides are male, and mostly younger males, that is age 35 downwards. Why are males more likely to commit suicide than females? Because females can feel suicidal in every way the same as a male. Most males are more likely, considerably more likely, to commit suicide because of testosterone. Testosterone gives the masculine propensity for utilising successfully lethal force. Males are far more likely by nature, because of testosterone, to use lethal force. Therefore, when males feel suicidal tendencies, suicidal thoughts, they are far more likely to carry out the act because they are turning the propensity for the utility of use of lethal force upon themselves. Females are much less likely to use lethal force, generally speaking. So that is why males, generally speaking, are far more likely to use lethal force. What I can say with a degree of certainty is that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Males are also far more likely to commit suicide because their channels of outward expression are stifled. Boys are taught from a young age, amongst their peers in particular, that talking about your weaknesses, talking about your inner turmoil, your anxieties, your sadness is not strong, is weak. Therefore, boys mature into men who are stifled by an inability to express their emotions because they are concerned about being perceived as being weak. Females are far more likely to express themselves in this way. This is a significant factor in contributing towards the high rates of male mortality as regards taking their own life. So there we have it in a nutshell. Jonathan the Tiger Palmer self-harms for the reasons I've disclosed. He feels intensely suicidal, but he does not follow up the act of committing suicide. There is a degree of separation between the way that he thinks and feels and the way that he behaves in this respect. He does not commit suicide. For me, in my experience in a private therapeutic practice with clients, I am of the opinion that outward expression is one of, if not the highest forms of therapy. Being able to sit with another person who cares and is empathic about the things that you're experiencing and to talk things through, I consider that to be the highest form of therapy. Anyway, I appreciate this can be quite an emotive subject. Please, if it's affected you in any way, just give me a shout out on my email address, which is now on the screen. I'm always happy to interact with others. In the next video, I'm going to talk about post-traumatic stress and how that impacts upon the key characters, and in particular, Jonathan the Tiger Palmer. So until then, have a fantastic weekend and stay safe.